Fox News Alert tonight. We just learned that former President George H.W. Bush was taken to intensive care at Houston Methodist Hospital. Admitted yesterday, we're told, a day after the funeral for his wife, Barbara. Obviously, you see the picture with the Bushes there and with the Obamas, Melania Trump, and there you see the former president shaking hands at the funeral. Just moments ago, receiving a tweet from the family spokesperson, Jim McGrath, saying President Bush was admitted to the Houston Methodist Hospital yesterday morning after contracting an infection that spread to his blood. He is responding to treatments and appears to be recovering. We will issue additional updates as warranted. Dan, that service, was really touching for a family that obviously has been through a lot, but saying goodbye oftentimes, sometimes can lead to saying goodbye twice.
It can, and hopefully the president will have more days with us. But I was struck, not simply watching him at the funeral, but also when people were filing by and the public being able to go say goodbye to Barbara Bush, and the president in the wheelchair greeting them, shaking hands with them. I mean, it was a remarkable tribute both to her and to him in the way he conducted himself.
And seeing that image where they walked out all together and he was being wheeled out, Steve, with a big smile on his face, that was really quite something.
It was, and you heard George W. Bush talk about how his mother was at peace with her passing because of her deep faith. It's easy to see that translated to the rest of the family, and you just say an extra prayer tonight for George H.W. Bush and hope that he responds to this treatment. Yeah, and obviously we'll keep you updated here, and we've been in contact with folks, and that statement coming out literally as we were in commercial break. Charlie, your reflections of that service and kind of that picture was quite something to see all of those folks together.
It really was, and the whole service was. But one of my favorite things about all of the remembrances about Barbara Bush is that she lost a daughter, Robin, when the child was 3 years old. So
1953.
Yeah, and so. A mother never gets over that, and a mother never forgets that. But I just thought it was so lovely that in Barbara Bush's passing, Robin was remembered by the whole world all over again, and I just thought that was a very special part of all of it.
Yeah, a lot of reflections about Barbara Bush, obviously from this service, Dan. But as you look back at George H.W. Bush and how eventually he will be remembered, and his time in office will be remembered, how would you characterize it?
Well, I think he's going to be remembered mostly for the foreign policy accomplishments that he had. President Reagan obviously gets great credit for hastening the end of the Cold War, but it was left to George H.W. Bush to finish that. The Soviet Union did break apart during that. And I also think the reunification of Germany, which he did over the strong opposition of Margaret Thatcher, who was very reluctant to push forward on that. And he, with Brent Scowcroft, who was his closest foreign policy advisor, and Jim Baker, did that. I think assembling the coalition for the Iraq War after Saddam invaded Kuwait. I mean, I think all of those things remind us of what he accomplished, but I also think it's partly the way he conducted himself.
And this picture struck me over the coverage, particularly. This is the day before the funeral. That's Doro Bush wheeling her father there to the moment where in front of the casket there, a private moment. Soon after this, at the church there, he essentially greeted all of the people who were coming, not dignitaries, just average people walking into the church. So we will keep you updated, and we're saying a prayer for George H.W. Bush tonight. The office saying that he is responding to treatments, but he is in the hospital. When we come back, a look at how the president's first official state visit is all coming together. Finally tonight, crossing the Potomac, as we mentioned, President Trump, French President Emmanuel Macron, and their wives are at Mount Vernon right now, dining at the Virginia estate of our first president, George Washington. Before leaving the White House grounds, they planted an oak sapling from Belleau Wood, an historic World War I battlefield north of Paris. More than 1,800 U.S. Marines were killed there fighting the Germans nearly 100 years ago. The deep bond between the U.S. and France will be celebrated, as we mentioned, during the Trump's first state dinner tomorrow at the White House. First Lady Melania Trump has been shepherding the arrangements, from the decor to the flowers, the menu, the wine, you name it. She put out a video of all the preps today. We'll have more details tomorrow. That's it for the special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. Here's Martha. Martha.
Thank you, Brett. Good evening. All right, so we begin with a Fox News alert. Mike Pompeo, President Trump's pick for Secretary of State, barely avoiding a rare rebuke from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee after some unexpected last-minute drama on both sides of the aisle. Senator Rand Paul reversed course and voted yes to recommend Pompeo for Secretary of State, but that left the vote with a 10-10 tie, which is essentially a fail. It was Democratic Senator Chris Coons who handed the Republicans a victory by changing his no vote to present, making the final tally 11-9. That's how things work. In the Senate committees, Senator Rand Paul joins me now. Senator, good to have you with us tonight. First question, what changed your mind when you met with Mike Pompeo?
You know, one of the things I've always liked about President Trump was that he's unequivocally says the Iraq war was a mistake. What I've been concerned about with Director Pompeo is I wasn't sure if he shared the president's vision because, you know, the Iraq war and regime change led to a lot of chaos in the Middle East. Same thing happened in Libya when we did regime change. And so I want whoever's to be Secretary of State to understand where President Trump's coming from. And so last week, the president asked me to meet with Director Pompeo, and out of respect for the president, I did meet with him. Then we talked again today. I've talked to the president several times. And the president reiterated in very strong terms that we've been at war in too many places for too long. And I think the president's going to surprise a lot of people by really, really trying hard to get us extricated from some of these wars.
Did he assure you that he would leave Syria?
I think it wasn't so much specific on timetables and places, but I would tell you that the president and I share a great deal when we talk about the desire to bring some of our troops home and to have our troops protecting our country and not spread out across the world. And so I think you'd be surprised when you see and hear the conversation between the two of us. And really, I've always been an advocate. I mean, Trump was probably the closest to me on foreign policy of any of the other 16 running. And so I've always been an advocate and a supporter of the president on this. Yeah. And I want to make sure the people around him share his vision. And over time, I'm coming to believe that, and I'm hopeful, you know, that Director Pompeo does share that vision. But the president told me one way or another, it's his vision, and he's not going to be persuaded to start more land wars and have hundreds of thousands of troops in the Middle East, no matter who's around him. We'll see. You know,
President Macron is there right now trying to convince him that he should not leave Syria and that he should not pull out of the Iran deal. But I want to ask you about this because President Trump said the other day, Rand Paul's a good man. He never lets me down. And obviously, in your home state of Kentucky, it's a good move to support the president. Did either one of those things weigh on you?
Not so much. I mean, what really weighs on me are the wars and all the young men and women who have been injured in our wars. My wife and I work to try to help some of these severely injured veterans, and my heart goes out to them. And I just see that now people are admitting, Pompeo and the president are admitting there's not a military solution in Afghanistan. I just can't send one more soldier. So really, it's my voice and having that voice and using that voice to try to end these wars that motivates me, not political considerations.
There were also critics who said that perhaps you didn't want to be the only member of the GOP to vote to approve John Kerry and not approve Mike Pompeo.
I've been by myself before, and I'm not afraid to be by myself when the cause is just and the cause is right. And I think in the cause of war, there aren't enough voices saying we've been at war for too long and that we need to vote on it in Congress. So I'm very proud of where I am on that. I haven't changed my position at all on that. I just, in discussing with the president, believe even more strongly that the president shares my vision, that the wars have gone on too long and too many places.
So it sounds like you would be very surprised if Emmanuel Macron could convince the president that he needs to keep a presence on the ground with our military in Syria longer term.
Well, I think
that would surprise you.
If we were there 5 years from now with 50,000 troops, I'd be aghast, and I couldn't believe that it would happen under President Trump. I think the president does want to draw down the troops, and it's a complicated dance to figure out how and when to do that and how fast to do it. But I don't think he accepts what the neoconservatives say. The neoconservatives say if you ever leave, it's defeat, and the other side will win, and we must stay everywhere forever. And that's just plain wrong, and we can't afford to do it. The president shares with me that we need to build some things at home. We need to build some bridges and some roads at home. We can't keep spending $50 billion a year in Afghanistan.
Senator, thank you very much. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you.
Also breaking tonight, a win for the White House in the middle of a crucial visit with French President Emmanuel Macron. He has agreed to something that the president has been really pushing for since the campaign, fair share payment by France into the NATO coffers. The president has come down hard on NATO member countries like France in the past for their failures to meet their financial commitments, as he puts it, to the alliance. And in moments, Senator Lindsey Graham will join us with his exclusive reaction to that and to the big issues that are at hand with this visit. There seems to be a surprisingly warm relationship where it had once been quite frosty with President Macron. So we'll get Lindsey Graham's thoughts on that. But first, Kristen Fisher, live at the White House with the late-breaking details tonight. Hi, Kristen.
Hey, Martha. Well, as you said, we're already seeing some big developments come out of this visit by the French president. The White House says President Trump has just secured from France a commitment to increase their defense spending and meet their NATO obligation over the next 8 years. That, of course, is something that President Trump has been pushing for since the very early days of his presidency. And now it appears that he's walking away with a win here. Now, right now, Presidents Trump and Macron and their first ladies are having dinner just across the river in Virginia at Mount Vernon. That's the old home of George Washington. And, you know, these two leaders have really a remarkable relationship. On paper, they're at odds on almost every issue. And yet, in person, they formed a real friendship. And they put that alliance to the test with those recent strikes in Syria. Ahead of his visit, President Macron explained to our Chris Wallace just how important this alliance is to the French people. Listen here.
During the First World War, during the Second World War, when we were attacked, when our liberty was attacked, thousands of young people came here and died here for my country. That's the story of our relationship. And President Trump and myself are, whatever happens, in the line of this history.
Now, in addition to the conflict in Syria, the two leaders are also going to be talking about North Korea, transatlantic trade and tariffs, climate change, and at the very top of the list, the Iran nuclear deal. President Trump has said repeatedly that he wants out, or at the very least, he wants some major changes. Macron says that he wants the U.S. to stay in. They have, of course, a May 12th deadline looming. But today, the White House press secretary said that she's sure the U.S. is going to come out on top.
I feel very confident that we have the best negotiator at the table.
Now, tonight's dinner is really just a warm-up. Tomorrow, of course, is the big day, the first official state dinner of Mr. Trump's presidency. It'll all start tomorrow morning with a big 30-minute-long welcome ceremony on the South Lawn of the White House, then back-to-back bilateral meetings, a joint press conference in the Rose Garden, if the weather holds up, and then, of course, the big state dinner starts tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, just in time for your show, Martha.
Exactly. That's why I couldn't go. Thank you, Kristen. Good to see you tonight.
Sure.
They didn't invite any media, actually, or any Democrats for that matter. Here now with more, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. I bet he's going. Are you going to the state dinner tomorrow night, Lindsey Graham?
No, I'm not. I'm going to Chick-fil-A.
All right. So, you know, Macron ran as a globalist, and he
Right.
and President Trump had that sort of, you know, arm wrestle handshake in the beginning. I remember President Obama called him with this warm phone call, welcoming him to the, you know, global leadership. So now he's sounding in many ways a lot more like President Trump, and it seems like they got along great. What happened?
The reality of the world, I think President Macron knows if you leave Syria too soon, ISIS will come back. He understands that we need troops in Afghanistan to protect us against another 9/11. I disagree with the President of France on the Iran deal. President Trump is right. It's a weak, bad deal that ensures a nuclear arms race, but he's been a good ally. Michelin is in South Carolina. We love the French. And I think the reality of being president of a major nation during tough times has changed everybody a bit.
Interesting interview over the weekend with the foreign minister of Iran, Zarif. Let's play that. I want to get your thoughts on it, Senator.
Okay.
People of the United States voted for President Trump and elected him.
Do you ever wonder whether he will serve his full term?
I never wonder that.
Very interesting. French President Emmanuel Macron throwing a little bit of cold water on the Trump-Russia probe and saying that in reality it has little impact on how he interacts with foreign leaders. And recent developments in the case, especially the criminal investigation and the raids of Trump attorney Michael Cohen, suggest to some that there may be a shift away from President Trump. Of course, people differ on that. Joining me now, Tammy Bruce, the president of Independent Women's Voice, a Washington Times columnist, and a Fox News contributor. Tammy, good evening. Good to have you with us tonight.
Hey, Martha.
I also want to play a soundbite first from Susan Collins, who has been privy to a lot of this investigation. Listen very closely to what she said on the Sunday shows.
What's your sense of Michael Cohen's connection to this Russia probe?
That's a very difficult question to answer. There's been one interview with Michael Cohen. It has not been released to the public. I'm not at liberty to say what he said. But let me just say that I don't see him as being a central figure in this.
Interesting. Tammy, what did you make of that?
Well, I think she's right. She's trying to be very careful, but let's look at this. It's almost like inside baseball, I think, to some degree. But the left has realized they're not really going to be able to hurt the president. The fantasy narrative of Russia collusion is really obviously collapsed. And in this case now, you're looking at a subsidiary effort trying to harm the president's support team. And it's not just, the political supporters, but a lot of what you see is also attacking and aimed at Mrs. Trump as well, like the Stormy Daniels stuff. Americans, we know through polls, don't care about it, but I think that there is this drumbeat where they want to just wear them down. That said, you've also, though, got, and as an activist and as a former left-wing community organizer, I look at what the narratives are going to be versus what the facts of the matter are. And with Mr. Cohen, we've already heard from either the attorney's office and other analysts that it's about his business dealings and that he's been looked at for months prior to the very dramatic raid, and it has nothing to do with President Trump. But the Fusion GPS founders a couple weeks ago had an opinion piece in the New York Times laying out what they want the narrative to be, which is, and they admit in it that they have no evidence for this, but they're now pushing this notion that maybe there are with Mr. Cohen a relationship with Mr. Trump and real estate dealings internationally where there's money laundering and where there's assisting of criminal elements. And even in the piece, they admit that there's, again, no evidence to this, but it's very similar to the dossier gossip and rumor and the maneuvering and the pushing of that. So it's almost as though the Cohen investigation provides another opportunity for the left to make things up, to run a narrative through the media, to continue to try to hammer at the Trumps, regardless of its veracity.
Yeah, no, there's an obsession all over most channels with whether or not Michael Cohen's going to flip. And we're going to continue to talk about that. Tammy, thank you very much. Good to see you tonight.
Sure.
So here now to weigh in with his opinion on all of this, Judge Andrew Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst and New York Times best-selling author. Judge, good to see you tonight.
So kind. Always a pleasure to be with you.
So you believe that this investigation into Michael Cohen, you've said all along, is very dangerous for the president.
Yes, and here's why. After the FBI raid, Mr. Cohen hired lawyers to bring an application in federal court for the return of everything that was seized, saying these are legal records and they really belong to my clients, or in the alternative, to appoint a special master to segregate what belongs to the clients and what belongs to him. And the government had a very interesting response. The response, about a third of which was redacted, so we couldn't read it, said, look, Michael Cohen has been under investigation for a while, and we believe that much of what he's been doing has not been as a lawyer, it's been as a fixer. And Michael Cohen has some sort of a relationship with Donald Trump, which leads us to believe that, quote, the crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege rule applies. Well, what the heck is that? That means that the federal government told a federal judge that President Trump was involved in a crime or a fraud and was communicating to Michael Cohen about it, and therefore those communications were not privileged. Yet when you want to look at what they actually said happened, that's the part of the brief that they didn't reveal to the public, and it was redacted. She said, the federal judge, well, how do you know this? Where are you getting it from? Tammy just alluded to it.
Yeah.
Well, the feds told her. Another federal judge signed another search warrant. This was a surveillance warrant, which enabled us to have Mr. Cohen under surveillance. We've been listening to his phone calls for the past 3 months. Who does he talk to almost every day? The President of the United States. I believe that this is
So those phone calls are from
troubling.
while the president was in office?
Yes.
Or prior to then?
While the president was in office. That's
what
why
do you think about that?
I think it is an outrageous violation Donald Trump believed he was talking to his lawyer. All of a sudden, we find out retroactively that the lawyer was subject of a criminal investigation, and the federal government, prosecutors, have their hands on those conversations, and they believe that those conversations are going to lead them to the president. That is just not the way.
So the Mueller team got them to sign off on that warrant to listen to the president's phone conversations, you're saying?
I don't know the answer to
someone
that.
had to present the judge with that.
Yes.
With that,
that
desire, that warrant.
Sounds as though Mueller picked up something in D.C. and did the right thing with it. He sent it up to New York. The U.S. attorney in New York, a Trump appointee, recused himself, and the next level of career civil service prosecutors took the ball and ran with it. Whatever Mueller sent caused a judge whose name we don't know yet to authorize the surveillance. Whatever came out of the surveillance caused them to go to a judge whose name we don't know yet and to conduct these raids. Whatever the fruit of the raids was is being kept on ice by Judge Kimball Wood until she can decide whether it's attorney-client privilege or not. If Michael Cohen is charged with a crime having nothing to do with Donald Trump and having nothing to do with Russia, I believe they will squeeze him the way they did Rick Gates, who was charged along with Manafort in a crime that had nothing to do with Donald Trump and nothing to do with Russia.
But the president says there's nothing to flip on. Flip on what? There's nothing to flip.
I hope the president, for his sake and for the country's sake, is correct.
Judge Napolitano, good to see you tonight.
Likewise.
Very interesting. All right, so after President Trump's endorsement, conservatives cringe over Senator Bob Corker's tepid endorsement of Republican Marsha Blackburn in the race to elect his own Republican replacement.
Senator, that's not a ringing endorsement of Marsha Blackburn.
I've worked with the nominee for some time, and I don't know what else to say.
Marsha Blackburn responds next. And as even more details emerge about Larry Nassar, Martha MacCallum is sidestepping her responsibility. She ran the ranch where Larry Nassar was examining all these girls. U.S. Olympic gold medalist Jordan Weber is here to share her story.
First of all, these training camps were organized by USA Gymnastics. It's not organized by Bela or Martha MacCallum.
Just days after the funeral of former First Lady Barbara Bush, tonight President George H.W. Bush has been admitted to a Houston area hospital, we're learning. A spokesman saying this: President Bush was admitted to the Houston Methodist Hospital yesterday morning after contracting an infection that spread to his blood. He is responding to treatments and appears to be recovering. We will use additional updates as events warrant. This announcement comes just 2 days after this photo was taken at the funeral for Barbara Bush with all of the assembled prior presidents and their spouses and Melania Trump, the First Lady of the United States. We will update you as we get more information on the 41st president. Also developing tonight, some trouble in Tennessee where the race to replace retiring Senator Bob Corker has taken another turn. Corker, who decided not to run for re-election, went back and forth at one point, but then decided not to do it, not have a great relationship with President Trump, who once suggested this about Corker: he couldn't get elected dog catcher in Tennessee. From that tweet, this week the president endorsed Republican Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn to take Corker's place, saying this: Blackburn's a wonderful woman who has always been there when we have needed her, great on the military, border security and crime, loves and works hard for the people of Tennessee. She has my full endorsement, and I will be there to campaign with her! Exclamation point. But Corker, in an interview on Sunday, hesitated to even mention his Republican colleague, who he says he supports, by name.
Endorsement of Marsha Blackburn to say that she should be elected just because she's going to vote for Mitch McConnell.
Well, Dan, I'm supporting the nominee. I've worked with the nominee for some time, and I don't know what else to say.
Tennessee Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn responded to that with me a short time ago. Well, what's that about?
Oh, you know, everybody is going to have opinions, and I am focused on November, beating my opponent and making certain that I do the job of representing the good people of Tennessee in the U.S. Senate and voting for what they want. More tax cuts, securing the southern border, conservative judges on the Supreme Court and on the federal bench. People are tired of judges that legislate from the bench.
Understood, but why is it so hard for your, fellow Tennesseans, Senator Bob Corker, who says that he supports your run for the Senate, to say that he wholeheartedly supports you. What is it that you don't agree on?
I have not talked with the senator, and I am focused on making certain that we win this election in November.
I understand that, but it's gotten a lot of attention, and I'm sure that you would love to have his wholehearted support. You certainly have the president's. In the recent polls, you're about 10 points apart. What's your read on what's going on in your state when you look at that number?
What is happening in our state is that people are going to begin to focus in on this race. They're going to pay attention to how the next senator is going to vote. And we were so pleased to get the president's endorsement today. Earlier, the vice president's endorsement came out, and we are thrilled with that. I had the opportunity to work closely with him when I was in the House, and he was in the House. So we're looking forward to having their support and having them in the state to campaign with us, and making certain that we earn every single vote and that we win this race in November.
Yeah. I know Mitch McConnell, according to a report in the Washington Post, had a little chat with Senator Corker on the floor and basically said, look, if you hadn't vacated your seat, we wouldn't even have this issue in Tennessee, encouraging him to get behind you. Does it matter? Do you not need his support?
I would love to have Senator Corker's support and the support of every Tennessean. And we've been so fortunate with our state Senate and state House members to have a majority of the support there. And we just cherish that. Martha, to have people say that they stand with you and they're willing to fight with you and to work with you. And we thank Senator Corker for his service to the state. And of course, like everyone else, we would love to have the opportunity to earn their vote and talk about the good things that we're going to do, representing them in the way they want to be represented.
One of your staffers, or someone who works on your campaigns, said, anyone who doesn't think that Marsha Blackburn can win is a, quote, plain sexist pig. Do you agree with that? And is sexism at play here?
No. I don't agree with that. And certainly I understand frustrations many times that women face, but I don't agree with that. And there again, this is about the most qualified person to do the job, to work with Tennesseans and to represent Tennesseans in Washington, D.C., to make certain that their voice is being heard and they're being represented well to the federal government. And as I said, more tax cuts, securing the southern border, supporting our military, having good conservative constitutional judges. Those are at the top of the list for Tennesseans, and they know that they can count on me to support President Trump and his agenda, and to make certain that Tennesseans and what they want is being passed through the Senate and making its way to the president's desk.
Well, it's going to be fascinating. We're going to be watching all of these races as we get closer, Congresswoman Blackburn, and we thank you very much for being here.
Martha.
Obviously, we've got the president in your corner, and he says he's going to be there campaigning for you, so that'll be interesting to watch.
Absolutely.
Good to see you.
Absolutely.
Thank
Good
you
to
so
see
much.
you. Bye-bye.
My thanks to Marsha Blackburn. Coming up, Kanye West saying that freedom of thought is under fire after he praised a conservative activist. Also, the famed U.S. gymnastics coaches, the Karolis, finally answering questions about their responsibility for the abuse that took place on their watch. Olympic gold medalist and survivor of Nassar's abuse, Jordan Weber, joins me next.
Even though I'm a victim, I do not and will not live my life as one. I'm an Olympian.
I don't feel responsible, but I feel extremely hurt that this thing happened, and it happened everywhere but happened here also.
Bombshell new interview that is shedding a lot of light, but also raising a lot of new questions about the Larry Nassar abuse scandal. As legendary gymnastics coaches, Bella and Marta Karolyi finally speak out about what was going on at their ranch. And Olympic gold medalist McKayla Maroney reveals shocking and disturbing new details about what was happening with Dr. Nasser. In moments, we're going to hear from one of Maroney's 2012 Olympic teammates, Jordan Weber, her take on all of this. But we start with Trace Gallagher in our West Coast newsroom with the details of this bombshell story. Trace.
Martha, the Karolis first made a name for themselves as the Romanian gymnastics coaches in the 1976 Olympics, where Nadia Comaneci scored 7 perfect tens. The Karolis later defected to the U.S. and built an even bigger gymnastics powerhouse, winning 97 world championships and Olympic medals. Bella and Marta Karolyi have credited their success to strict routines and exacting standards. But now the couple is facing 2 lawsuits filed by a number of their former gymnasts, accusing them, among other things, of hitting and scratching athletes, withholding food and water, and making comments about their weight. The Karolis deny the physical abuse, but admit there's a price to pay for perfection. Watch.
Verbally, definitely not abusive. Emotionally, it depends on the person. You have to be a strong person to be able to handle the pressure. Maybe you say a little overweight, but in order to be a good gymnast, you have to have the right ratio in between strength and weight.
But the former gymnasts say the Karolis didn't just create an environment of intense competition, they enabled the abuse of Dr. Larry Nasser by building a culture that allowed Nasser to prey on young gymnasts. They say Nasser acted like their friend and brought them food, candy, and coffee. The girls say at the time they didn't know these were grooming techniques. McKayla Maroney, who won gold as part of the Fierce Five in the 2012 London Games, says Nasser molested her hundreds of times, starting when she was 13. She also described to NBC News a time when the doctor assaulted her in a Tokyo hotel room. Watch.
He went like overboard that night. I was bawling, naked, on a bed, him on top of me, and I thought I was gonna die.
The next day, Maroney says she told her teammates and a coach what Nasser had done, but still no action was taken. And the Karolis still maintain they didn't know.
I heard during the testimonies that some of the parents were in therapy room with their own child, and Larry Nasser was performing this.
And they
the
didn't
parent couldn't see how I could see.
Maroney responds saying Marta Karolyi controlled what she wore, what she said, even what she ate. How could she not know about Nasser? Martha.
Trace, thank you. Here now, Jordan Weber, Olympic gold medalist and survivor of Larry Nasser's abuse. As you said in the courtroom, you're a victim, but you are an Olympian, first and foremost, and we congratulate you on that, Jordan. You're an amazing person, and all of you are, for standing up and talking about this. So thanks for being here tonight. So when you watch that and you listen to Marta and Bella Karolyi, and she, crosses her arms over herself and says, "How could I have known? Even the parents didn't know." What do you think?
It's very disheartening that they can't see that the environment that they created and the training style that they continue to enforce on all of the club coaches and the gymnasts. They can't even see that is part of the problem. They created this intense environment that allowed someone like Larry to come in and easily abuse young girls. And even if they didn't see it with their own 2 eyes or hear it with their ears, they weren't making sure that it wasn't happening. This was happening on their property. They allowed him to be alone in a room with us and treat us any way that he wanted.
What about he allowed them to be alone in hotel rooms? Was he ever in a hotel room with you? Did he ever treat you, give you in the hotel room?
Well, anytime we went to an international competition or even the Olympics and the World Championships, he was allowed to treat us wherever he designated that treatment room to be. And USA Gymnastics did not look over him. They didn't supervise him whatsoever.
McKayla Maroney says that she, after that moment that she speaks about so emotionally in that interview, she says that the next day she spoke about it openly in a car, and that the coach, John Getter, was in that car. Were you in that car?
I was in that car. I remember McKayla describing what happened to her, and I know that there was another adult in the car, and whether they heard it or did not hear it, it would have been very difficult to not hear that. It's just very disappointing that an adult would hear that and not say anything or do anything about it.
And I want to show a tweet that Ali Reisman sent out. She was very upset. She was part of this NBC piece on Dateline. And this is what she said today. Our prime time for investigative piece, no interview scrutiny of current recent executives of USAG, the organization responsible for the sport and much of this mess. Why? I named someone currently in power at USAG that I reported Nassar to, and it was omitted. Why? Still many unanswered questions. So she's saying that someone who she went to and explained that she was being abused is still in power at USAG. Do you know who that is?
I have my suspicions. I don't know it 100%, but I do know that even though the board of directors at USA Gymnastics all resigned, the people in power that have the most interaction with the athletes on day-to-day at the training camps, at the competitions, they are all they're still the same people there. And so I have a feeling it's one of those people, and I think that as long as they are still in power, USA Gymnastics is never really going to understand what truly the problem is and how to accept accountability for what they have enabled an abuser to do and the culture that they have created.
Do you think that USA Gymnastics, that there should be hearings, that they should be investigated?
Yes, I absolutely think so. I think that there should be a hearing where USA Gymnastics has to be there and they're asked questions and they're asked why are there no medical records of our treatments at the ranch, and
Great
I mean
question.
that among many other things.
That's a great question, Jordan. I hope you'll come back. Good to see you tonight. Take care, okay?
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you. So coming up, something different. Rapper Kanye West infuriating his fans by announcing his support for an African-American conservative. Will he apologize? Or is he going to stand his ground here? Jonah Goldberg on that and the bigger picture surrounding it next.
Hi, no comment about your meeting with the president-elect. This is the president-elect of the United States. Nothing to say?
I just wanted to take a picture right now.
Kanye West stirring the pot a bit this weekend for showing support for an African-American conservative, Candace Owens, writing on Twitter, quote, "I love the way Candace Owens thinks." Here's what may have led to that reaction from him. Watch.
The truth is that the left wants to strap black people to this idea that they are victims. They like black people to be government dependent. They don't like to see black people that are free thinkers and are independent.
So after coming under fire from some on the left, the rapper is now firing back, tweeting this, quote, "The thought police want to suppress freedom of thought." Here now, Jonah Goldberg, National Review senior editor, Fox News contributor, and author of the brand new book, Suicide of the West, How the Rebirth of Tribalism, Populism, Nationalism, and Identity Politics is Destroying American Democracy. So you can see why we wanted to talk to him about Kanye, because he also has a great talent for weaving pop culture into helping us understand what's going on in the world. Hi, Jonah.
Hey, Martha. It's great to be
see
here.
you tonight. So, what do you think about the kerfuffle between those two?
You know, when I first heard about it, I was like feeling as if never have I been so torn about an issue that matters so little. But then when you actually look into it, I think Candace Owens makes a really solid point. I'm not in the position of automatically assuming that Kanye West is doing any of this stuff for the most high-minded of reasons. He's a brilliant marketer. And he's brilliant about generating controversy. But at the same time, this is the guy, you know, who said some terrible things about George W. Bush when George W. Bush was president. And he hasn't actually defended Candace Owens' arguments. He just says he likes the way she thinks and likes that she's an independent thinker. That's good enough, you know, but I think Owens makes a very good point that there are people on the left, people in identity politics generally, want to reduce all sorts of vast swaths of American people down to the color of their skin or a single grievance.
Absolutely.
And that's a big problem in our culture.
And that, I mean, you see it in this Shania Twain story as well. She, I guess, had the gall to say that if she's Canadian, but that if she was an American, she would have voted for President Trump. And then she basically tripped all over herself to say that she was so sorry that she ever suggested that. I mean, it demonstrates to me that we live in a moment where you simply cannot disagree. You cannot say anything politically connected without getting lambasted by the other side.
No, I think that's right. I mean, the Shania Twain thing kind of reminded me of that scene from Anchorman where Ron Burgundy jumps into the bear pit and then immediately says, "I immediately regret my decision." You know, she just should have stayed quiet.
No, we should have played that clip. That's a great idea.
But No, one of the arguments I make in the book is that increasingly we're retreating into our homes, we're retreating from our communities that we live in, and we're watching politics like it's a form of entertainment, where we root for certain villains and we root for certain heroes, and you have to pick a team one way or the other. It's sort of like the way we talk about sports. We're now talking about politics, like the same way, where we have to be on a team, and it's treason to say something counter to your team.
I want to challenge you on that a little bit, because you talk about how the miracle of democracy that America is was really built on the idea of persuasion, and that if someone had a legitimate argument, that you could be persuaded. And I would suggest, what about the people in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania who had been Democrats their whole life, who were persuaded by the argument of President Trump?
Yeah, I think some of them were persuaded by the argument of President Trump. I think a lot of them were also persuaded by the failures of Barack Obama and of Hillary Clinton. And I'm not someone who wants to sort of reduce vast swaths of people to saying that they all think this way or they all think that way. But I think one of the things we are losing in our culture on both sides is the importance of persuasion, of making arguments. The whole idea that reason and facts and logic can convince someone to switch their position or be open-minded. We live in a deliberative democracy. If no one can change their positions on anything, what's the point of having a deliberative democracy? And I think this is sort of a bipartisan problem on both sides, and it has to do with things that are way upstream of Washington.
Case in point, the Pompeo vote tonight, right? I mean, everybody just dug in their heels. All right, I'm present. I'm present. I'm not no, I'm present. Thank you, Jonah.
Hey, great to be here.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank
Good to see you.
I appreciate it.
Quick break, and we'll be right back.